Not the last doping question the race leader will have to field at this year's Tour, I suspect. Now, stage 9 is packed with climbs which are packed with history, some of it tragic. The first of the day, the Col de Porte d'Aspet, is the 100th Tour's tribute to Fabio Casartelli, who died there in 1995. And the second, the Col de Monte, is where Luis Ocaña famously crashed out of the 1971 Tour in the yellow jersey. From there, the riders tackle 3 more first category climbs, starting with the Col de Péresaude. It's a downhill run from the summit of the final climb, the Roquette d'Anzicon, so the race will flash through Saint-Maurice-de-Campan with its new statue of Eugène Christophe, who stopped there to weld the broken forks that cost him the 1913 race. And where the riders hit Bagneres, they'll be out of the Pyrenees the day after they entered. Welcome back. A 5-climb day in the Pyrenees. Vacances Soleil's Thomas de Gendt took the mountain points at the summit of the Col de Péresaude, while behind Movistar kept up the pressure on Chris Froome. De Gendt then fell back and Simon Clark got away from a group of 4 to lead over the Col de Val-Laurent-Azé. But the relentless pace being set by Movistar swept up the break early on the final climb, which is where we join it. So one more summit and the downhill finish to come.
7 kilometres from the top of the last mountain of the day here, and still it's the Movistar team who keep the pressure on one by one. They've wiped out the leaders, pushed them all to the back and behind, and now we're waiting to see, can they launch Valverde into the attack? Froome knows now his Sky teammates will not be rejoining him until they visit the hotel tonight. Port is over 4 minutes back. That's Quintana in the white jersey. This is Michael Rogers here now, who's also going to the back. The strong man of Alberto Contador.
Well, Mick Rogers did a lot of pacemaking in the early part of this race. He was actually one of the early breakaways and had to sit up and wait for Alberto Contador, who was caught on the back foot a fraction. I don't think we're going to see a move come here from Movistar, Phil, because they probably feel if it comes down to the sprint in the end, Alejandro Valverde is still the strongest man in this group. But look at the faces of these riders from Spain. They have suffered all day today. This has been a very long, hard attack through the Pyrenees, and it was all for one goal. It was to try and put Chris Froome into isolation. The first part succeeded. The next thing is to try and put him into difficulty, but he showed yesterday that he's in very good form, although I would think today he's passed a very lonely day on his own in this leading group.
But he's controlled it. He's he didn't panic. He adopted his tactics, which is to mark out Valverde and Quintana.
Valverde looks very comfortable there, sitting in 3rd place, but it's always a little bit risky when you leave it down to the final sprint of the day, especially when you know there's been a lot of guys in this group have been passengers. They've just been sitting there, while Richie Porte, further down the climb, has lost a huge chunk of time. He's now at 5 minutes and 16 seconds. That puts him a long way down in the overall standings. It's been a tough day for Richie Porte this afternoon. He had a tough time in the first part of the race.
And Movistar just letting these 2 boys continue to set the pace and do nothing about it. And the kilometres are ticking up to the summit of this last mountain of the day. Well, it looks like Kwiatkowski's got himself back onto the tail of this bunch at the moment as they go past 5 kilometres to go and continue to slog the way up. There's a false flat on the way down. They do climb a little bit as they start the descent, and then they start to plunge down to Bagneres de Bigorre, where the famous site of the Pic du Midi overpowers the town down there, high point of the Pyrenees.
Now there's a move. Here we go. This is Quintana, and the acceleration coming from Chris Froome right onto the wheel of Chris Froome. It's Alberto Contador. We could see this move coming.
Well, we can. I know you thought he wasn't going to do it, Paul, but I felt that was plan A. And plan B is for Valverde to win in the sprint. Interesting. He seen the reaction from Froome and backed off.
Yep. Well, they wondered whether or not they were going to let him go free, and there's Alejandro Valverde moving up. That wasn't the same as the attack of yesterday, Phil. I think that was a little bit of a dummy attack just to test the waters.
I think you're right, and cold waters they are up here as the snow melts, I can assure you. Now, Nairo Quintana is on the front in his new white jersey, his highest placed young rookie of the Tour de France. And up on the inside, Dan Martin's gone. Now, are they going to react to Dan Martin? He's not as close to Chris Froome as Cantara, so Chris is going to say to the guys from Movistar, you try chasing. 2:48 the gap to Dan Martin in the overall.
Yeah, Dan Martin started the day in 13th place overall. His uncle is Stephen Roach. This is Fulsang now from Astana coming out of the group. These are guys a little bit further down. Now, the responsibility, Phil, is not going to be on the shoulders of Chris Froome. He needs to make the other guys in this group actually do the pacemaking.
Absolutely. Those two riders don't affect the destiny of the yellow jersey. In fact, Chris Froome might be rather delighted that they've made that, because Fulsang is 3:27 behind. So if these two are both are very good climbers. Now, is this Igor Anton at last getting away from the front? He was yo-yoing off the back not long ago. No reaction at all. The infight for yellows continued. Well, I tell you what, Nairo Quintana started a flurry of attacks, and he's not part of it.
Well, the unfortunate thing, Phil, for Team Movistar is they've assassinated the team this afternoon. Their guys in this group are actually weakened and clipped to the back. 3.9 kilometres to go to the summit. Dan Martin from Ireland just gone through there. Now there's another move from Nairo Quintana.
Well, now he's going to go and repair the damage. He started it. Now he's given them a chance. And, of course, Froome now reacts, and he goes after the young climber from Colombia, because this man could take his yellow jersey. And there's a good turn of speed from Froome.
No, Froome is put on the back foot. He has to defend here this afternoon. Look at Andy Schleck in third or fourth position there. How the Luxembourger responded very quickly to those attacks.
Well, Michael Rogers has climbed his way back onto the tail of this group, but now they are continuing. The breakaways will go, but they're not going to counter the moves of those three riders up front. There's only two men that Froome can look after, and this will be after to the white jersey of Nairo Quintana and the other jersey of Valverde. They're the men he's got to monitor. The other three can go. And here it goes again. Nairo Quintana is going again. And again, Chris Froome has got to answer. He buries his head. He's got to hook up to that back wheel and hang on in there, because this man could disappear over the top of this hill and steal the yellow jersey of Froome.
Well, Phil, this is what I was explaining to you yesterday about real pure climbers. They can attack again and again and again. Now, that is the kind of movement that's going to hurt Chris Froome this afternoon. And he hasn't got any teammates up alongside him to give him any assistance at all. He has to assume the whole of the responsibility of chasing down the guys who he feels are dangerous.
Well, you could tell that rider, it was Nieve on the left who's coming back to the group. We still have Dan Martin and Fulsang up the front. And if we just swung to the back, I think we'd see that this big group has disintegrated under the pressure of these attacks here. This is now the rear of the group here, as this is Hubert Dupont.
But the action is all really on at the front as these guys are all looking at each other. It's nice to see Andy Schleck at the front of the Tour de France in the blue helmet there with his jersey open. I wonder if he's going to have a little dig here this afternoon, because in the last month, Phil, just leading up to the Tour de France, we started to see a little glimpse of the Andy Schleck of old.
Now up to the man who's caused all of the problems here, and it's Dan Martin, as he's now trying to get clear for the stage win. He's got a very good ally in Fulsang.
Now there's another move from Quintana, but there's got to be a reaction from Chris Froome. Chris Froome there in the yellow jersey is very, very attentive. He knows he can't give Quintana too much freedom on a day like this. And all of the time, just sitting on his wheel, Alejandro Valverde and Alberto Contador, although Andy Schleck's getting in on the action too.
Schleck is the surprise right now, interfering. He was awarded the 2010 Tour de France after the disqualification of Contador for drugs. And now they're both in this group here. Every time you get those accelerations, riders will drop off at the moment. This is Moreno Fernandez. He's gone. Now, it doesn't look as though these attacks are actually hurting Chris Froome. He gets across quite cool. His face is saying nothing whatsoever. They have whittled it down to a select bunch of 15 riders chasing two. And nobody else is going to decide this day's stage of the Tour de France. Dan Martin here. He knows Fuglsang very well. He's got a good ally, a good pacemaker. And together they can go to the finish. I'm not sure that Martin can outsprint Fuglsang at the end.
Don't forget who was the winner of Liège-Bastogne-Liège in the early part of this year, Dan Martin. It was an uphill finish, I'll admit, on that occasion, but also don't forget who his uncle is, because his uncle is none other than Stephen Roach, who won the Tour de France in 1987, and Stephen is expecting big things from Dan Martin in this year's Tour.
Now the yellow jersey has gone to the front and keeps on looking at the two men likely to attack him. A nice psychological demonstration of, well, it's your turn, boys, I'm still going pretty well. As we go to the rear of the chase of the main group here. Cadel Evans, number 31, he's had a much better day today, Paul, because he was dropped early on. He's come back up to this group.
I'll tell you who, in fact, are the big losers in this group here, Phil. It's not Chris Froome at all. It's Alejandro Valverde. They've let this race slip out of their hands. Controlled it for such a long period of time, with all of the pacemaking being done by Team Movistar. Now, all of a sudden, they've allowed two guys to slip clear, and there's no chase coming in this group behind. So I think Movistar are going to have to take responsibility once we get to the top if Alejandro Valverde wants to get the victory for Spain in this last Pyrenean stage.
Well, they're heading up towards the summit. Dan Martin also has an interest in the King of the Mountains competition. Hasn't scored a lot of points yet, but he is on the board, so he could well take out 10 points here if he can get the better of Fuglsang. There's the last kilometre of the last climb of a vicious day passing through these Pyrenees. 4 first category, 1 second category, and what a great race it really has been. I think you're right, Paul. I think Movistar, having done all of the work so far, have not shown anything for it.
No, and Alejandro Valverde just sitting on the shoulder there of Chris Froome. He was looking very good in this group, and I thought that he would be the fastest man. Maybe they are just keeping the group together, and they will organise the chase once they crest the climb. But Dan Martin in that leading group of 2 riders is in good form coming into the Tour de France. He finished 8th overall in the Tour of Switzerland, and Fuglsang as well was also in fine form in the Criterium de Dauphiné, where he finished in 4th place overall.
The flags of Spain and the Basque sector of Spain flying there as the group heads up towards the summit. They're still hoping that they can get a home win here for the Spanish, because there's plenty of Spanish riders there. They've really shown their colours today. 46 seconds though. Dan Martin and Fuglsang have got themselves a nice little lead here. I think a minute over the top, and they've got a chance to speed to the bottom and take the stage out.
But Chris Froome does not really need to chase at a time like this, and he will expect the other teams to do the pacemaking. I've noticed Saxo Tinkoff are quite keen to send a rider forward. They're just assuming a tempo pacing at the front. The orange jerseys there are the Basque supporters. They come down here in their hordes from just over the other side of the border in Spain, and they would love to see a Spanish winner this afternoon. But the Spaniards, in large numbers in that leading group, seem to be letting this stage slip away from their hands.
Well, we'll see a demon descent to come, of course. We're not far from the summit now. Dan Martin here is just waiting. There's the first move that is coming now from the field. It's coming from Vacansoleil here. If they start to move now, this is going to cause another counter-attack to come. A wonderful crowd here of Spanish supporters, and they don't care who they shout for. There's the summit, the orange jersey by way of Euskaltel Euskadi, but they still shout just as loudly. And Dan Martin's taken control for the points in the King of the Mountains. They won't be sharing anything if they survive to the finish now in bagneres de bigorre. A little bit late lunch there for Fuglsang. And take it easy, because this has a tortuous beginning, this descent.
Well, he gets maximum points. This is Wout Poels in 3rd position out on the road, and still no reaction at all coming from that group of the heads of state of the Tour de France this year. The only man from the top 10 who's missed out is Richie Porte. He is a long way behind. The computer telling us now more than 9 minutes behind the yellow jersey group, and any thought of a high place overhaul for him is disappearing out of the window.
Wout Poels, here he is, wanted a drink there, but nobody prepared to offer him one. Now they come over the top, 42 seconds behind the 2 leaders, and well, I think Chris Froome now can breathe a sigh of relief. He's controlled all of the pacemaking by Movistar today. It's all downhill apart from a little blimp on the descent, and he'll just keep a close eye now. They've lost a chance to get time today for sure. As the sun gets high in the sky, these are the two leaders looking for a 10-kilometre banner as they now drive on. They're still clear, but only 25 seconds. And the man doing all of the damage is Robert Hessink, in the hope his teammates can finish it off in the sprint. The pressure is now off Chris Froome.
Alberto Contador has had a ride through the mountains here this afternoon. But Rodriguez, 101 for Team Katusha, he too has survived the mountains. But the man who has impressed me the most really this afternoon, Phil, is the man who won the Tour de France back in 2010, and that's Andy Schleck.
Well, Dan Martin wrote early today, he said back in 1999 he had his first experience of riding, not riding but watching the Tour de France at Val Thorens Azet, and that's exactly the mountain we crossed 2 mountains ago. And so maybe that was an omen for the Irishman, who is now out in front with Jakob Fuglsang. But there's still reaction here, and look at this now. Andy Schleck is getting mixed up in the moves now. This is interesting.
Well, he's feeling more and more confident. He had a very nasty crash last year in May in the Criterium de Dauphiné in his preparation to the Tour de France, and he fractured his pelvis. It took him a long time to be able to sit on the bike again. In fact, he was off the bike for about 4 months. He tried to come back at the end of last season in the Tour of Beijing, but he just could not do it. And everybody said that he was psychologically finished, but that's not knowing Andy Schleck. He's a strong character.
This is a desperate pursuit into the finish. Who would have imagined this after crossing 4 mountains like they've come over today, when they had the stepping stone at the beginning of the Col d'Aspet as well, into Compon.
Richie Porte has lost almost a quarter of an hour on today's stage, and any chance of finishing on the podium alongside Chris Froome has just disappeared out of the window, all because of one bad day in the Pyrenees.
Well, it's settled one problem, if there was such a problem in the Sky team. I don't think there was, but there's only one rider for Sky left in with winning this tour now, and that is Chris Froome. But there are teams here who want to win the stage. Cadel Evans is in this move. His team has been so unfortunate and weakened throughout 2 days in the Pyrenees that there's nobody really on BMC now in the final hunt for honours. The 5-kilometre banner, and it's still Fuglsang pile driving at the moment. Dan Martin having a brief respite, and then he'll be through to do his share. They are 5 minutes from the finish. The gap is going up.
They are not weakening at all. They are helped a fraction, Phil, by the fact that it is slightly downhill, but they are riding extremely fast. 60 kilometres an hour is their average speed. It's going to be very, very difficult now for that group behind to actually pull those 2 riders back into the fold before the end, because the power has gone out of that group that's chasing them. 34 seconds at these speeds is 500 metres. And if we pull back, it looks a lot further than it was just a few moments ago. It's starting to tip towards the advantage of the 2 leaders. Dan Martin, hands in the middle of the handlebars, trying to get into almost a time trial position here, as he knows he needs to make himself just that little bit more aerodynamic. The power of Fuglsang, though, as he comes forward. This rider was once on Team Radio Shack, and he left because he wanted to become a leader on a different team. And he's leading now as we look at him ride with Dan Martin. Martin just keeps looking at the back wheel of Fuglsang, trying to figure out, what have I got to do to beat this man in the sprint? But they can't mess about and do any cat and mouse tactics as they move down towards the finish line, because 37 seconds, it's still going up. An extra 3 seconds to the advantage of the 2 leaders.
Of the top 11 riders who finished the Tour de France yesterday and took the leadership overall, the only one missing is Richie Porte. He falls away from 2nd place and will plunge probably down into the outside the top 50 now. Everybody else behind the 2nd place move up 1. Valverde will now be 2nd tonight overall. Turning for the finish now, and 2.8 kilometres to go. Cheers all the way from a magnificent crowd in the Pyrenees.
Well, these 2 riders are the guys who made the move on the final climb of the day, and once they got to the summit of that climb, with a 30-second or so advantage, they worked brilliantly together. Now it's a question of which of these 2 men is going to win. I have to say, I really don't know, because neither of them are prolific winners, although Dan Martin did win Liège-Bastogne-Liège in the sprint. Fuglsang hasn't had an individual victory so far this season, and he's been much better in the longer stage races.
Well, they just about got a little time in the last kilometre to try and have a bit of cat and mouse, but not a lot. We're looking for the 2-kilometre banner now. Fuglsang back on full bore here now. Martin just getting into his slipstream, saving a little bit of energy, few deep breaths, and get up and do some more pace making. 33 seconds surely is enough for these 2 to fight out what has been a magnificent day in the Pyrenees in the Tour de France. Martin straight back to the front.
Well, he knows what he has to do. He knows he's got to try and come out of the slipstream of Jakob Fuglsang if he wants to get the victory here this afternoon. They also know, Phil, as they look here at the 2 kilometre to go banner, they can't mess about and try and force one rider or another to the front of the line until they get inside of the last kilometre and more likely closer to the 500 metre to go mark.
Under 2 kilometres, and here come the peloton. Steve Morabito is on the front as they head towards 2 kilometres as well. The yellow jersey of Froome, they attacked it well today, but he's happy now. All riders who finish together get the same time. He'll keep his gains of yesterday.
Well, 26 years of age for Dan Martin in second position. It would be fairly good for his team if he was to get the victory this afternoon, because they're the guys who came out of the starting block with a plan. That was to make this an extremely tough Pyrenean stage. And I'll tell you, everybody that's been in the stage this afternoon will know that tonight when they get onto that plane to fly up towards Nantes for the restart after the rest day.
1.3 kilometres to go. You won't bridge 33 seconds, but hey, they've been trying for the last 30 kilometres to bridge it. It's not going to happen now. The winner of the stage will come from here.
Well, the question is for Dan Martin, he's going through his mind is, we've succeeded now, we're at the kilometre banner, we've got 30 seconds advantage. What am I going to do to win the stage? He is now going to force Fuglsang to do the pacemaking. He wants to be in second position because he knows that he's got to get out of the slipstream once the sprint starts.
They swing into the straight outside of my commentary box. They're pounding the boards to pieces here. Fuglsang doesn't want Martin on his back wheel. Who would have thought this is how he would end a journey through the high mountains of the Pyrenees? Almost 5 hours. Martin will wait as long as he can. The seconds are closing off. They don't care. They can see the finish very shortly.
He's waiting for Fuglsang to open up the sprint, but as they get closer to the finish, if he's still got a strong set of legs, he's got to try and surprise him with the first initial jump.
Dan Martin, who lives in the Midlands in Great Britain, his dad Neil now will be in bits here watching his son in the Tour de France as they wait to see, can he do it? He's gone. He's gone, and Fuglsang grits his teeth, but he's been forced onto the back wheel. It's a tricky finish. They wanted that left-hander 300 metres from the line. It's a long way to go to the line. If Fuglsang can hold this and keep in his slipstream, Martin looked to see where he got. Kicks again. Dan Martin wins for Garmin Sharp, and that is a tremendous win in his second Tour de France. As they line up now, it's the men from Katusha. Kwiatkowski in the white jersey. He packs a pretty powerful sprint finish, beaten on the line, I think, there by the Katusha rider. And I think it was Rodriguez who just pipped him on the line. Chris Froome safely home after his most nervous day in his first day in yellow in the Tour de France. But at the end of it, he lost nothing.
Amazingly, he hadn't, although he's lost his chief helper and buffer between him and his main rivals. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, the stage result, a sensational attack and two-up sprint from Dan Martin to beat Jakob Fuglsang. Michał Kwiatkowski led in the yellow jersey group ahead of Joaquim Rodriguez and Cadel Evans. The yellow jersey himself was 14th, surrounded by rivals and not a Sky jersey in sight. In fact, it was a second shy of 18 minutes before the next one rolled in. Although Richie Porte had given up the chase to save his legs a while before the end, he was making no excuses, not that he ever does.
Full credit to Valverde. I mean, he attacked so early. That takes a fair set of swingers to do that. But yesterday was my day, and today was probably the worst day I've had on the bike all season. So, but still another 2 weeks of the tour, so I'm looking forward to moving on.
And Richie, there's not a bug going around the team, is there? A few riders seem to be in trouble early on today. Well, I mean, in fact, Chris was isolated after 40k, had no one with him.
No, I mean, there's nothing going on. It's just, I think the peloton, kicked our asses, and that's all there is to it.
4 minutes behind Porte came Geraint Thomas and crash victim Peter Kenyon. And another 4 Sky riders were in the autobus at 26:20 with Mark Cavendish and the sprinters, which just leaves one to make up the full 9, but the TV cameras had turned off by the time Vasil Kirienka came in. He was outside the time limit and therefore out of the race. So a quite astonishing second day in the mountains, topped off with a brilliant stage win as a free bonus at the end. Dan Martin showing he can climb, finish fast when he needs to, and might be a rider who can come back and compete for overall victory at some point in his career.
Every year I seem to progress a little bit, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and yeah, maybe we'll get to the level that I can start thinking about the yellow jersey. But for now, obviously chasing stages is a lot of fun, and that was the important thing today. We set out this morning, we just wanted to rip the race to pieces and enjoy riding and make the race exciting for the people at home. I mean, it's Sunday afternoon, obviously a lot of people are watching TV, so why not put on a show for everybody, you know, and avoid the procession to Paris that we endured last year. I mean, I'm a cycling fan too, so I like an exciting race. So it hurt, but it was worth it.
And listen, it's not as if you're 10 minutes down, you know.
Yeah, I think that's maybe what we didn't think about at the start of the race. I was trying to slip in a breakaway, and Chris wasn't too keen to let me go, so he kept chasing me down. I was like, oh yeah, wait a minute, I'm only 2 minutes down. So yeah, for sure. I mean, it was an intense race. It was just hard all day, and hopefully it was spectacular. I mean, it's your call.
It was spectacular, and well done you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Pierre Rolland was wearing the polka dot jersey as the second place rider behind Chris Froome in that competition today, and wearing the polka dot shorts despite a worldwide campaign on the internet begging him not to. He took the jersey as of right thanks to his time out in the break today. Froome couldn't have cared less about relinquishing that, I suspect. He was happy still to have the one he started the day in.
It looked like the maillot jaune against the Tour de France.
It certainly felt like it out there. It was that was one of the hardest days I've ever had on a bike. But just being in that front group without any of my teammates was left me a little bit exposed and a little bit vulnerable in that respect. But credit where it's due. I mean, the Movistar team really took up the race, and they had 7 guys in front there. So it made my job a little bit more difficult, and I had to mark a few separate different guys. But I felt quite within myself on the climbs at least, and I'm just really glad to still have the yellow jersey.
Were you surprised that you were on your own so early?
Not really, given that my teammates really did do such a big job yesterday to get me into the yellow jersey. I mean, they're only human. They can't be there every day up at the front. And this morning, it wasn't a great start for us. Pete Kenner crashed off the road earlier on. And the stage being the way it was, so mountainous, we were pulling on the flats, and basically as soon as we hit the climbs and the race lit up, it's understandable that the guys felt that pressure and weren't able to make it up into the front group.
It looked like you had Quintana under control, though. When he went, I think he went 3 times. You covered it relatively easily. That's how it looked? How did it feel?
I'm glad it looked easy, but no, definitely didn't feel that easy.
Although you wouldn't know it just from looking at the standings, astonishingly no change in the time gaps today, just everybody moving up one, starting with Alejandro Valverde, who's now second, as Richie Porte drops out and Dan Martin makes an appearance in 8th. Jakob Fuglsang moves up 2 from 17th to 12th. Richie Porte's podium hopes are well gone. He's now 18.5 minutes down in 33rd.